Everyone has probably heard of Warcraft, even the least informed people on the planet. Everyone, that is, except actor Travis Fimmel. He once claimed he had never even heard the name, which is pretty strange. Back in the day, Warcraft was a strategy game series by Blizzard Entertainment, the company behind StarCraft and Diablo. As its popularity grew, the Warcraft universe expanded with comics, books, and a rabid fan base, eventually evolving into one of the most famous multiplayer online RPGs. In the 2000s, when the game was at its peak, Blizzard considered turning it into a massive film. The Warcraft movie was first announced in 2006. It was meant to be a grand response to The Lord of the Rings. With a well-developed universe and a massive fan base ready to storm theaters, it seemed like success was inevitable. By 2020, we should have been watching Warcraft Part 15. But as is often the case with projects of this scale, things kept falling apart. Creators came and went in frustration, and Blizzard had to keep going back to the drawing board until they finally released the movie in 2016. This film is a bit of an anomaly. Despite a $160 million production budget and a $439 million box office haul, it never got a sequel, even though the studio originally had plans for several. Today, let's take a deep dive into the making of this film and explore why Warcraft never got a follow-up. The first director to show interest in a Warcraft adaptation was Uwe Boll. According to him, he made Blizzard an offer they couldn't refuse. However, they refused it immediately. Boll claimed the studio flat-out told him they would never give him the rights to a Warcraft film. The next major director attached to the project was Sam Raimi, the man behind Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man trilogy and cult classics like Darkman and The Quick and the Dead. When Raimi joined, he brought in screenwriter Robert Rodat, and together they started working on a new script. Blizzard, however, insisted they already had a great script and saw no need for another, especially one that would, in their opinion, be worse. Raimi strongly disagreed, saying the existing script was terrible and asked for the chance to write his own version. Blizzard agreed, but what Raimi didn't know was that they had veto power. Before he and Rodat even started writing, the company shut down their ideas. When they finally delivered the script, Blizzard bluntly told them they had wasted their time on garbage and that no one would make a movie based on it. Raimi, feeling insulted, walked away, leaving Warcraft alone with its supposedly brilliant script. We'll never know what was so incredible about that script, as it was lost in 2012. The next version of the script was written by Charles Levitt, best known for Blood Diamond and K-Pax. If you think Warcraft lucked out with its writer, keep in mind that he was also responsible for the disastrous fantasy film Seventh Son. Regardless, it was Levitt's script that caught the attention of the director Duncan Jones in 2012, and he was the one who finally brought Warcraft to the screen. Jones's hiring was met with enthusiasm, not because he was the son of the legendary David Bowie, but because he had already directed two well-received sci-fi films, Moon and Source Code. Like many directors, Jones immediately started making changes to the script. He didn't like how the humans were portrayed as the good guys and the orcs as generic villains. He found that approach outdated and decided to shift the focus, showing the war from both sides. This time, Blizzard approved the director's vision, perhaps because he wasn't trying to rewrite the script from scratch like Raimi did. Jones also believed that the Warcraft universe was too eccentric, even for fantasy, and wanted to ground it with more realism while still staying true to the original game. His revised and improved script was finally put into production. The casting process went smoothly. The only actor who turned down a role was Colin Farrell. He met with the director, read the script, and still walked away. To be fair, he was offered the role of King Lane, which ultimately went to Dominic Cooper. Throughout production, the filmmakers hyped up the movie's visual effects. They claimed Avatar would pale in comparison, and The Lord of the Rings would be instantly forgotten. Filming wrapped in early 2014, meaning post-production took nearly 2 years. That's when the film's biggest problems started. After multiple test screenings, Warcraft was heavily edited, leading to the uneven pacing that many critics and audiences complained about. At first, Duncan Jones denied that anything had been cut, but in later interviews he admitted that the original version was over 40 minutes longer. However, there will never be a director's cut of the film. The problem with Warcraft is that it's one big special effect, meaning the studio would have to spend $40 million just to restore those missing 40 minutes. There were rumors of reshoots, some allegedly done without Duncan Jones, but the director personally denied those claims. Warcraft was also notable for its delayed release. Initially, it was scheduled to premiere in December 2015, dangerously close to J.J. Abrams' Star Wars. After the delay, many wrote off Duncan Jones's film. But while Star Wars was a formidable competitor, the Jumanji franchise proved that multiple blockbusters could still thrive at the box office in December. Warcraft's release was pushed to late May, where it grossed what seemed like an impressive $439 million. Seemed impressive. Many people don't fully understand how Hollywood studios actually make money from their films. They assume that if a studio invests $100 million in a movie and it grosses $103 million, the studio's profit is $3 million. Then, after releasing the film on home media and streaming platforms, the money supposedly starts pouring in. In reality, it's more complicated, and in Warcraft's case, much more complicated. We're not talking about shady accounting tricks here, though those do happen. For example, one Harry Potter film grossed over $1 billion, but was officially declared unprofitable in studio records. These tactics are often used to avoid paying out bonuses. At least that's what the so-called jealous gossipers claim. Over time, actors and other stakeholders start noticing inconsistencies, find loopholes, and take studios to court to get their rightful earnings. Kevin Costner, for one, is notorious for this. On average, a studio gets about 50% of a film's box office revenue. If a movie makes $100 million, a major Hollywood studio typically takes home $50 million. However, this percentage isn't fixed and varies from film to film. In the U.S., a studio might receive anywhere from 50% to 60%, or in rare cases, even 75%. This happened with Star Wars when Disney strong-armed theater chains demanding 75% of the box office earnings for the first few weeks. Disney even threatened to withhold Avengers from cinemas that didn't comply. In Germany, this nearly led to a Star Wars boycott before a compromise was reached. In other words, major franchises sometimes have leverage over theaters. However, these situations are rare. Movie theaters make most of their profits from concessions, popcorn, soda, and snacks, so studios that can guarantee packed screenings may exploit that leverage. In Europe, studios typically take 40 to 50% of box office earnings, with theaters keeping the rest. In China, the percentage is even lower. Hollywood studios only get 25% of a film's earnings there. To boost their cut, many studios cast Chinese actors and partner with local studios to gain co-production status, increasing their share to 35 or even 40%. Since these percentages fluctuate, an industry standard estimate of 50% is often used. A movie that performs well domestically might bring in a little more, while one that relies heavily on the Chinese market might see a lower return. By this estimate, Warcraft actually did decently. The movie was slightly in the red after factoring in marketing costs, but let's be honest, who isn't struggling in Hollywood these days? Here's where the details matter. Warcraft earned a laughable $47 million in the U.S. Its international box office was much stronger, pulling in $391 million. That's better, but there's a catch. $220 million of that came from China, where Legendary Pictures, the studio behind Warcraft, only received 40% of the earnings. Since Legendary was owned by the Chinese conglomerate Wanda Group, the movie was considered a Chinese co-production. That means Legendary took home just $88 million from China. Of the remaining $171 million, Universal Pictures, Warcraft's worldwide distributor, excluding China, took 50%, earning about $85 million. In total, Universal made $108 million from the film's global release, but that's assuming they got the full 50% from European markets. Legendary received $88 million from China. Now here's where things get even messier. Warcraft's $160 million budget was divided among several investors. Legendary, Tencent, and other Chinese companies covered 75% of the budget, $120 million. Universal covered 25%, $40 million. Of the $120 million invested by Chinese partners, only $88 million was recouped. Meanwhile, Universal, which only invested $40 million, walked away with $108 million. It might seem like Universal came out ahead, but there's a problem. Marketing is always a wild card. Even if we assume the rumors are true, and Universal barely spent anything on promoting Warcraft in the US, which allegedly led to its poor domestic performance, they still didn't break even right away. However, Universal eventually turned a profit thanks to revenue from streaming platforms, TV rights, and media sales. Meanwhile, Legendary and its Chinese partners had a much rougher time. Marketing expenses for Warcraft in China were record-breaking for the local market. Even though Legendary earned an extra $25 million from selling merchandise rights, it still wasn't enough to break even. In other words, the Chinese investors took a massive financial hit, which is why we never got a Warcraft sequel. In 2016, Stephen Chow's The Mermaid was released in China and grossed over $500 million domestically. Many believed Warcraft would surpass that, making more money in China than anywhere else combined. The movie's opening in China was record-breaking, but as soon as reviews started coming in, Warcraft collapsed. What about home media and streaming? In 2016, DVD and Blu-ray sales were already in decline, but they still played a role in a movie's profitability. Unfortunately, Warcraft's home video sales were abysmal. It made just $17 million from DVD and Blu-ray sales. After deducting retailer cuts, manufacturing, and other costs, that number shrinks by nearly half. For comparison, Star Trek Beyond, 2016, made nearly $60 million from home video sales. John Wick, Chapter 3, 2019, earned over $60 million. Even John Carter, 2012, which was a notorious flop, managed to pull in $40 million. Some flops do find redemption on home media, like The Shawshank Redemption, which bombed in theaters but set VHS sales records in 1995. But Warcraft wasn't one of those exceptions. People often ask why a movie is considered a flop when its box office earnings exceed its budget. Warcraft is a textbook example. The money wasn't split evenly, and the biggest financial burden fell on the wrong parties. That said, Warcraft still made too much money for Hollywood to ignore. Just like with Terminator, the studios won't stop trying. According to rumors, a reboot is already in development, with new actors and new directors. As for Duncan Jones, he quickly lost his rising star status after Warcraft. In the last 8 years, he's only directed one small European film, and judging by the reviews, he hasn't been able to recapture the magic of Moon or source code. Many believe he jumped too fast from indie films to a massive blockbuster and simply couldn't handle it. Maybe they're right. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.